This is The Wigmaker Job by Courtney Woods. In a cold, dark room beneath the streets of Virantium, Ambrose Forfex prepared for the wig show of the season. Using a thimble as a gauge for thickness, he measured out a lock of hair. His slender fingers brushed through the strands. The silky texture made him tremble. This guy, by the way, is a real fucking freak. You'll find out he's even worse than this intro. There were no imperfections, no split ends, no breakage, only hair, lush and velvety, in its purest form. A throaty sigh escaped the wigmaker's lips. Flawless. The approaching pitter-patter of footsteps interrupted the moment, his moment. Two hooded figures stopped at the entrance of the wigmaker's workshop. They didn't dare enter. "Ambrose, we need to talk," one of them said. "Your boots sound like dead fish slapping against cobblestone," Ambrose sniffed. "Upstairs," the other replied. Ambrose let his tresses slip ever so delicately through his fingertips. "I'll return soon," he murmured, then followed the pair up the staircase to the main living quarters. Only when they were safely in the sitting room with the curtains drawn did the figures lower their hoods. They were both Altus, the highest class of mage in the Tevinter Imperium. "You need to cancel the event," Crispin Cavlo stated. His father was a magister, and he had grand plans to follow in his footsteps. These guys, as it will soon be revealed, are Venatori, and I find it interesting how it's made specific note that, like, they are magisters, or at least aspiring magisters, because that goes to show that the Venatori really are ingrained at this point into Tevinter society. It's not just this estranged cult. They really have a large foothold in politics, so pretty scary to think of. No wonder the shadow dragons are necessary. "Need?" Ambrose mocked. "How dramatic." "This is serious," Felicia Aramond said. Her brother Livius had introduced Ambrose to the Venatori, opened his eyes to a future where the Imperium could once again be great. Oh my god. I wonder if that is intentional. It must be, that wording. It's got to be intentional. "Someone's put a contract on your head, just like the others. The crows are coming," she whispered, the last part as if words alone could summon the infamous assassins. Ambrose stifled a groan. The dragon does not fear the crow. "It does when it's already killed 8 other dragons," Crispin snapped. He had begun to sweat. His eyes darted towards the closed doors and windows like a caged animal's. "Look at you, quivering over Antivan propaganda." Ambrose leveled the man with an unimpressed glare. "This is why the Imperium is in shambles." Without warning, the wigmaker grabbed Crispin's arm. The younger mage winced and tried to pull away as Ambrose dug his pointed thumbnail into his forearm. Blood, crimson and thick, seeped from underneath the nail. I picture, like, him cutting his thumbnails into, like, claws, it sounds like. That's quite the aesthetic. "Crows are flesh and blood, nothing more," he muttered a quick spell to close the wound. "The show will go on." Crispin jerked back as he held his freshly healed arm against his chest. Ambrose crossed the room to a small but well-stocked bar. All this talk of Antiva was making him thirsty. "The man who's taken the contract is no ordinary crow," Felicia explained, careful to keep her voice steady. Ambrose uncorked the wine with a wave of his hand and began pouring it into a crystal decanter. "He's Lucanus de la Morte." The bottle clanged against the crystal. A crack splintered down the glass. "Ah." Goosebumps pebbled the wigmaker's neck. He set the decanter back down on the counter and sighed. "Shit." I like how even before this job, which is what makes Lucanus even more infamous, he already has a reputation amongst these fuckers. I agree, Neopho. It's such a good introduction to see Lucanus's reputation from the perspective of the villains. That's really fun. Oh, I love this story and Eight Little Talents to bits. Courtney Woods, thank you so much for feeding us these good stories with the crows. In an unassuming inn on an unassuming road, Lucanus de la Morte sat with a whetstone in hand, his favorite sword resting across his knees. The monotonous movement of grinding stone against metal soothed him. Okay, autism moment. 7 daggers of various size and shape lay polished on glistening on a rough wool blanket at his feet. 7 daggers of various sizes and shape. Okay, buddy, I think that's a little excessive. Music, mixed with laughter and gossip, choked through the floorboards. Lucanus closed his eyes. His mind separated the sounds until they painted a picture. A waitress rushed from the kitchen. 2 lovers took advantage of a shadowy booth, their lips smacked together, wet and wanton. A man cheated at wicked grace, the card up his sleeve strained against the scratched fabric of his shirt. None is a threat. He relaxed. Yeah, I don't throw, just for the record, I am clinically, professionally diagnosed with autism, so I'm not just throwing it out willy nilly. I like calling characters autistic because I myself am autistic, and I'm like, oh, I see me in you. So that wasn't meant to be like insulting. That was me like, oh, that's cool. I can relate to that. You're not wearing that, are you? Ilario asked while admiring his own reflection. Lucanus glanced down at his ensemble. The jet leather greatcoat and black on black suit might have been conspicuous during the day, but for a night job, it was the tactical choice. He compared his outfit to his cousin's high collared navy and gold tunic. It was something an Antivan thought a Vint would wear. At least I don't look like a tourist, he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Ilario spritzed his hair with oil and slicked it back with both hands. No, you look like you're attending a funeral. I, I mentioned this before in Discord. Any of you who are part of this Discord might remember. But I think the real conflict between Ilario and Lucanus is just that one's a prep and one's a goth. Or emo, whatever you want to say. Very funny, Lucanus said flatly and returned to sharpening his blade. It's a job, not a party. Actually, it's a job at a party. Might as well look our best. Ilario flicked open a straight razor to trim an errant follicle of stubble that was ruining his otherwise pristine 5 o'clock shadow. Any excuse to primp. Hey, I'm only here because of you, Ilario grumbled. We should be halfway home right now. Only the great Lucanus della Morte could delay a summons from the first Talon herself. Lucanus set his sword aside. Ilario was generally thick-skinned, except when it came to their grandmother. Katerina can hardly complain. She's the one who beat into me my commitment to contracts. Memories of sweat-filled days without food or water came unbidden. Lucanus's back tingled from where his grandmother's cane had bruised his flesh for letting his guard down or fumbling his footwork. For years he'd hated her, but his time as a master assassin had since taught Lucanus that Katerina's cruelty was her way of making sure that he was prepared for this life, that he survived. Buddy, that's called abuse. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. All that effort training and grooming us, and the old woman still won't step aside. Beneath the bitterness in Ilario's tone was something rotten. Your time will come, Lucanus assured him. Will it? Ilario's piercing gaze met Lucanus's in the mirror. People talk. You've always been her favorite. He heard the rumors. For all their secrets and intrigue, the Antivan crows were a chatty bunch. My talents lie elsewhere, Lucanus said, gesturing towards the arsenal around him. You're the one with the silver tongue. I also like this, comparison between Lucanus and Ilario, where Ilario is very geared towards, persuasion, deception, the skills with, as he says here, silver tongue, where Lucanus is just like so not that, and he's very blunt and just brute force in the matter, but that brute force is damn good. So if she named you heir to House Delamorte, you'd refuse? Lucanus opened his mouth to respond when he'd realized someone was creeping up the stairs. He listened. The footsteps were too quiet, too sure to belong to a drunk. A servant? Doubtful. When he'd brought the floor, Lucanus had given the innkeeper explicit instructions to keep her people downstairs. That left the Venatori, unless someone else on his long list of enemies had found him. Lucanus? Ilario pressed. He held up a hand and clutched the warm lever from his sword. Ilario's pretty boy mask slipped as a coldness flooded his features. A retractable dagger shot out from under his sleeve. Damn, that's some Assassin's Creed shit. Nice. The intruder was at the top of the stairs and moving closer. Lucanus motioned Ilario to talk again. This isn't... Oh, apologies, people. I'm about to butcher this. Cassio e Pepe? Ilario complained, while making a show of tapping his dagger against a plate of leftovers. You ordered an Antivan dish into Winter. What did you expect? Lucanus replied. Talking now meant the intruder wouldn't know where he'd be later. Something edible, Ilario quipped. In 3 quick, silent strides, Lucanus positioned himself next to the suite's entrance. He could hear someone breathing on the other side. Their gloved fingers hugged the wall for cover. Lucanus could have laughed. People put too much faith in walls. Rearing back, he thrust his sword through the wood and plaster until it hit bone, and kept going. A shriek echoed through the hall, followed by a thud. Lucanus stood and stalked through the door. A hooded man, wiry and mustached, was trying to pull his impaled hand free. A mage's staff lay next to him. Upon seeing Lucanus, he reached for it. Energy, raw and potent, charged the air. The back of Lucanus's eyeballs itched, a physical instinct he had developed when someone was tapping into the fade. I want to know more about this. Is this like some Templar shit that you can just learn? Is Lucanus special in some way that he's able to sense magic like this? It's a throwaway line, but it happens a couple times in this story. I'm like, details, please. He clapped a hand over the mage's mouth and slammed his skull against the wall. Knock it off. Dazed, the mage dropped his staff. The energy dissipated. Lucanus grabbed the man by the collar and yanked him towards the door, causing the blade to carve an L-shaped slice through his skewered palm. Ilario waited with a chair and rope. Sit down, he beamed. Enjoy a little Antivan hospitality. While his cousins secured their prisoner's bindings, Lucanus retrieved his sword from the wall. The mage was coming too. His unfocused eyes took stock of his situation. I won't talk, he spat, even if you torture me. I'm too busy to torture you, Lucanus said, and ran him through with his sword. I'm sorry that this part gets me. Shock swept across the mage's gaunt face. Beneath a trembling mustache, his lips were wet with blood. He tried to speak, but the words got clogged in his throat. He slumped forward. Ilario frowned. If I'd known you were just going to kill him, I wouldn't have put so much effort into these knots. Check his pockets. Ah, Ilario said, pulling a scroll from the mage's jacket. Found something. The seal was broken, but the imprint of 2 dragons was still visible in the wax. Venatori. Thought as much. What's it say? Ilario unrolled the parchment and scanned the page. Gallant brothers and sisters, in our veins runs true to Winter blood, passed down from the dreamers. Ilario's head snapped up as Lucanus began pulling his sword from the mage's chest. Careful! Remember the tanner job? You ruined my best shirt. Lucanus smirked and continued extracting the blade. Ilario took 2 wary steps back, then continued reading. The importance of vigilance, it's our maker given right. Blah, blah. Oh, here. The Venatori will not cower to foreign mercenaries. The "it's our maker-given right" sounds a lot like something from Templars, which is funny. They are a comedic duo. This is like a buddy assassin comedy instead of a buddy cop comedy. No, they'll just die to them. The blade slipped cleanly from the wound. Anything else? Whoever clips the crow's wings will walk by my side when we enter the Black City and take back glory for the Imperium. Ilario lowered the scroll, perplexed. Well, that doesn't seem worth it. That's because you're not a true believer, except when it comes to coin. Ilario shrugged, unabashed, then handed Lucanus the scroll. It's signed A. Seems our Mark doesn't want you crashing his party. Lucanus stuck the scroll on the dead mage's chest. He's going to be disappointed. I'm just going to take a quick drink, apologies. I might have to do this a couple times where I'm still recovering from illness. Downstairs, the tavern's nightly merriment continued. The crows cut striking figures as they meandered through tipsy, twirling dancers and sidestepped servants bearing plates of stew and fresh bread. Yeah, I imagine these two probably stick out, what with Lucanus looking like Blade and Ilario dressed like to the nines. Sorry. Both men were lean with dark hair and umber eyes. Ilario was all smiles. He was a calculated handsomeness. From his smooth skin to his perfect white teeth, everything was contrived to be enticing. As they walked through the crowd, he basked in the appreciative glances he received, while Lucanus stared ahead, focused and intense. He was the kind of man you couldn't look away from until he looked at you. I love that description. Oh my god. When the innkeeper spotted them, her ruddy cheeks paled. Lucanus sidled up to the bar and slid 2 sovereigns across the uneven wood. For the mess, he whispered, watching her throat bobble. The innkeeper dropped the coins into her apron's front pocket with shaky fingers and avoided his gaze until she was sure he was gone. You know, Ilario said as they left the inn, she's likely the one who leaked our whereabouts to the Venatori. Lucanus breathed in the night air. Every city has its scent. Virantium's was spiced meat mixed with wet laundry. I'm aware. And you're paying her because innkeepers like to gossip. To customers, employees, other innkeepers. Next time the Venatori want information on the Antivan crows, she'll know who to back. And she'll tell her friends. That is quite dark, but an interesting thought. I wouldn't put it past them. The crows are real fucked up. Bossuary. Lucanus started down the street. Ilario trailed behind at a casual pace. So, what's the plan, now that Ambrose knows we're coming? I always assume the Mark knows I'm coming, Lucanus replied. We were never going through the front door. Ilario sped up to catch his cousin. I bought this, he gestured towards his tunic, because you said we were dispatching to Winter's premier Wigmaker at an exclusive party. Emphasis on exclusive. Uh-huh. It was a rush order. We were with the tailors for hours, I recall. Lucanus took a sharp turn down an alley. I'm sorry. I just really love their relationship because I think they say they're cousins, but they really have a more brotherly bond. I really like that. Above them, balconies jutted out like cramped elbows finding space in a crowd. A cat hissed in the distance. Why let me go through the motions of purchasing formal wear for an event we're not actually attending? I know how much you enjoy dressing up, Lucanus goaded and ducked under a pointed archway. Only if I'm going to be seen, Ilario groaned. His boots stepped in something squishy and foul-smelling. And why are we in the dog-shit part of town? Shouldn't a high-ranking member of the Venatori live in a mansion? He does. We're taking a shortcut. The archway led to a courtyard. Patches of brown grass, treaded and uncared for, encircled a statue of a scorched Venedal, an elven tree of the people. The real tree had burned down after a slave rebellion. The masters commissioned the current statue as a reminder of the price for rising against them. Somehow, Lucanus didn't think it had the intended effect. I'm just picturing this tree now. It's a stone tree, it reminds me of the stone trees we see in Dragon Age Origins that resemble a Venedal too, so I wonder if there's a connection there in its design. A shortcut that leads to a dead end. How novel, Ilario muttered, and pulling the collar of his tunic closer to his nose. Lucanus ignored him and approached the tree. The brass skeletal branches had produced a layer of patina, and streaks of erosion lined the bark. He ran his fingers across the trunk until he found a groove that gave way, opening a secret passage. Lucanus tossed a smug look over his shoulder. You were saying? Ilario rolled his eyes and followed his cousin into the passage, down a winding set of limestone stairs. I wouldn't complain if you filled me in, he grumbled. Yes, you would. As much, Ilario conceded. I wouldn't complain as much. The passage was musty with age. The uppermost stairs were 4 stones wide and 4 stones long, but with each step they grew narrower. The middle stones sagged from years of use. Lucanus had almost tripped the first time he ventured down here. The only source of light was from the torches of green veil fire nailed to the brick walls. Flecks of minerals and crushed glass, and the brick flickered and winked at them. It's like swirling down a bottle of wine, Ilario mumbled, peering over the edge. At the bottom, they found an elf in a scarlet coat guarding a large steel door. She greeted Lucanus with a cordial smile. This next part, again, something I really want more information on. Are we going to see what is about to happen in the Veilguard, or is it because of the crossroads that we won't need it? I want to know. I want to know. Master Della Morte, and her friendly facade faltered as she spotted Ilario. Master Della Morte the Lesser, Ilario offered with a grin. My cousin, Lucanus clarified. Appeased, the elf asked, Where does your business take you tonight? Up. She nodded. Lucanus planted his feet firmly on the ground. The elf clapped her hands together, snuffing out the veil fire. The room began to spin, gently at first, then faster. Lucanus bit back a laugh as Ilario held out an arm to steady himself. A few seconds later, the room slowed to a stop and the veil fire burned once more. The elf opened the door to reveal another spiral staircase. Yeah, how do these... I'm assuming it's an elven network because it's an elf who uses this or controls it, it seems. So is this dating back to perhaps, an uprising of enslaved elves that just remains and was refound? How do the elves use this regularly? Do they let people other than Lucanus use it? It seems very handy to be able to fast travel wherever. Oh, good. More stairs, Ilario deadpanned. Lucanus bowed his head in thanks and slipped a sovereign into the elf's gloved palm. Happy hunting, she whispered as they passed, then shut the door behind them. You've made friends, Ilario remarked as they began to climb. You would too, if you ever left Treviso. I'm here now, aren't I? He argued. Seriously, though, what is this place? A perk, given by our mysterious benefactor. Lucanus quickened his pace, hoping to leave the answer at that. Ilario did not take the hint. Speaking of, I have some questions about him, her, them? I'm sure you do. Oh, come on, Ilario urged, matching Lucanus's pace. When have we ever taken on an anonymous client? I think this anonymous client is Solus, by the way. That's my theory. It makes sense to me that Solus would be able to arrange to have this mystery travel thing. And it makes sense that Solus wouldn't want to be known by the crows. I'm just saying, it makes sense that Solus would also want the Venatoria taken out. It adds up that it could be Solus. And yes, I believe Ilario left Treviso before it was occupied by the Antam because Eight Little Talons takes place in the same period as this story, and that takes place before Treviso falls. So, where was I? Speaking of... here we are. Since someone could put a tangible stock in the phrase, silence is golden. You're not the least bit curious? Lucanus exhaled through his nose. If someone wants to pay me top coin to kill a bunch of racist blood mages who have it coming, I'm not going to complain. Well, when you put it that way. At the top of the stairs was an empty platform with no windows or doors. A blanket of moss carpeted the floor. Ilario let out a disappointed huff. That's anticlimactic. Just wait, Lucanus promised. He approached the far wall and began tapping the bricks until he found a hollow one. When he pushed against it, the mortar turned languid and flexible, allowing the bricks to peel back like skin. Well, Lucanus asked. Ilario tilted his head. Better. Stars and a warm breeze greeted them on the other side. As they stepped off the platform, the bricks locked back in place. They were several stories above ground on the third arched tier of Virantium's famed floating aqueduct. The Wigmaker's estate is a short walk this way, Lucanus explained, pointing to their left. One jump and we'll have access to his roof. Devious. Again, with the Assassin's Creed shit, I just love it. The crows strolled across the covered channel, listening to the steady stream of water flowing beneath their feet. Further below was a chorus of street traffic. Manrathus was Tevinter's capital, but Virantium was her sharp-dressed sister. Amid the sea of brightly colored tunics, stiletto heels clicked against cobblestone. Necks, both fat and thin, held up heavy, ornate headpieces with trailing gold-embroidered veils. Music from lyres and lutes wrestled for dominance as hawkers touted the latest factions. Apparently, Velveteen was in. Lucanus peeked over the side. No one looked up. One of the world's greatest wonders is mundane to these people. How do they get to float? Ilario asked, tapping his boot's tip against the aqueduct. Magic. Lucanus scoured the rooftops, searching for one made of a distinctive red clay. They were still a few buildings away. So, the Wigmaker, Ilario wiggled his fingers ominously. Tell me about him. He's weird, Lucanus replied bluntly. Buddy, you're one to speak. He found the moments before a job crucial for focus, but Ilario was never one for comfortable silence. Specifics, cousin. No one hires us to kill normal people. I gave you a dossier. Yes, but I want your assessment. I wrote it. It is my assessment. Humor me. The red clay roof was in sight now. You'll see soon enough. With a feline grace, Lucanus leapt off the side of the aqueduct. If they had been paying attention, the line of people wrapped around the Wigmaker's estates would have seen two shadows pass overhead, but their focus was on the stern-faced doorman guarding the entrance. Having your name on the guest list wasn't enough to make it inside one of Ambrose's parties. Your outfit had to impress as well. Both crows landed on the roof with a soft thud. Clay tiles weren't ideal for stealth. Their round shape offered little traction for their boots, and if one tile slipped, others would follow like a line of loyal soldiers. But at least Ilario was too busy concentrating to ask questions. The front of the Wigmaker's estate was a collection of domed rotundas encased in a zigzagging red and beige brick. Guests weren't allowed inside the mansion itself. They were led directly to a grand circular courtyard surrounded by two-tiered arcade at the back of the house. This is an interesting house design. I can kind of picture it in my head vaguely. I'm like, okay, bud, this was designed for parties, I guess? I shouldn't be surprised. This is Virantium. Moving in tandem, Lucanus and Ilario dropped to their chests and shimmied to the edge overlooking the courtyard. Tevinter parties, especially thrown by the Altus, were known for their access. Yeah, okay, so that does make sense. Lucanus still remembered the first gala he'd attended in Minrathus. Rows and rows of tables had been overladen with jugs of wine and platters from food for all over Thedas. Retching vases were placed in corners for guests to relieve themselves if they overindulged. Prized slaves were brought out to perform. Acrobats tumbled overhead, musicians played until their fingers blistered. While hunting his mark, Lucanus had opened the wrong door and walked into an orgy. Getting out of that had been interesting. Yeah, I'll say. Why aren't we reading that story? The Wigmaker's periwig show contained all this and more. A catwalk had been constructed at the center of the courtyard. Running down both sides were grooves for wine to flow from the dragon-shaped spouting fountains. The guests leaned over from plush chase lounges to refill their cups in the streams. They poured wine into each other's mouths and over their bodies, ruining the chic costumes that had been their ticket inside. On the runway, models walked, naked and dead-eyed. Floor-length hair hung over their sagging shoulders and gaunt hip bones. With each stride, their wigs transformed into miraculous, towering creations. On one, the hair twisted and curled to take the shape of a tree with a bird dancing to attract a mate. Another portrayed a nest of vipers, their striped, sinuous bodies wreathing against each other. As the wigs came alive, the models' blank faces altered to a flash of manic smiles, but Lucanus noticed their eyes remained lifeless. Oh, this is so creepy. His skull felt raw. The backs of his eyeballs itched like he hadn't blinked in days. Whatever magic Ambrose was using for his creations was tearing at the seams of the veil. Something's wrong. Yeah, Ilario agreed, zeroing in on a group of half-dressed revelers. We're up here, away from the fun. Lucanus snapped his fingers in front of his cousin's face. Focus. I am. On the job. To be fair, you never told me the plan. Lucanus shrugged. Find Ambrose. Slit his throat. Sounds complicated. It will be. The veil's thin here. Thinner than I expected. He rubbed the stubble on his chin. One wrong spell and his place will be swarming with demons. Then let's kill the bastard and scram. I want to see what this city has to offer. Our ship sails at dawn. Ilario waved a dismissive hand. Plenty of time for some good old-fashioned debauch. I see him, Lucanus interrupted. In the arcade above the catwalk, a man flanked by guards watched the emancipated models from the shadows. Ambrose Forfax was of average height and build, with hawkish gold eyes and a jaw that could break teeth. His scalp and cheeks were both clean-shaven, leaving his face bare except for two black, sculpted brows. They're never what you envision, are they? Ilario noted. What did you expect? Hair, for one. Maybe a funny little dog. I'm sorry. I keep laughing. That got a chuckle out of Lucanus, if only briefly. The way the Wigmaker stared at his creations was unnerving. Ilario was right. Amark's physical appearance was unpredictable, but the gleam in their eyes, the appetite to do something unspeakable, that was always the same. The way Lucanus speaks of his marks here, it makes me wonder, has he ever, killed someone who could potentially be innocent? Or does he just see them all as marks needing to be killed? Like, he speaks of them as being evil, and maybe he's only referring to the mages he's killed here into Winter, or maybe he's convinced himself that they all have it coming. I don't know. A woman rushed towards Ambrose's retinue. She wore an emerald gown with a high-waisted, low-tiered skirt and a fitted tulle bodice studded with champagne-colored crystals. Metallic body paint shimmered on her exposed arms and legs. Something about the woman's movement and stature were familiar, but Lucanus couldn't place her. "Well, hello," Ilario purred. "Who is this lovely Fiore?" After whispering something in Ambrose's ear that made him scowl, the woman motioned the guards to take the Wigmaker to the main house. Suddenly, Lucanus knew exactly who she was. Guard Captain Camille Spina. Ilario whistled softly. "This job is looking better all the time." "Focus, buddy." Once Ambrose was safely inside, Camille slipped a key ring from the silk brocade layers of her skirt and secured the door. Lucanus frowned. "I need those keys." "Your wish is my command, cousin," Ilario said, and flipped forward in one fluid motion. I'm going to take another quick drink. I don't feel bad for this stupid guard captain, but I feel a little bad for Ilario. Following closely from the roof, Lucanus watched Ilario slink through the crowd like a fox in the henhouse. Despite his earlier jab, Lucanus had to admit, if only to himself, that his cousin looked at home among the local gentry. Ilario winked at strangers as if they'd known each other for years, and the Vints were either too drunk or thought him too attractive to question his familiarity. Meanwhile, Camille made a valiant attempt to appear natural while sweeping the perimeter, but the instinctive nods to her fellow guards gave her away. Ilario waited until she broke for refreshment to make his move. Camille had just taken a sip of watered-down Molsum when a handsome stranger grabbed her glass and downed the rest. "Excuse me," she exclaimed. The party drowned out her words, but Lucanus could still read her lips. "That's my drink." Ilario simply smiled. "Guess I'll have to buy you another." Lucanus groaned, not only at the line, but that it worked. Even from his position, he could see Camille was hooked. He shouldn't be surprised. This was old hat for Ilario, but it was always amazing to see what one man's smile could accomplish. Yeah, like, that doesn't just come natural. I think Ilario was specifically trained in this, I don't know, like, enticing game, I guess. Seduction, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. Zevran and Tia, they all kind of play that game to at least some degree. So it's not like it's not established lore for crows to utilize that. Camille blushed and leans toward Ilario. Seizing on the opening, he reached around to wave down a passing waiter and lifted the key ring hidden in her dress. When the waiter presented the couple with a tray of drinks, Ilario discreetly swapped the keys for 2 glasses of Molsum. The waiter sped away, both he and Camille none the wiser. Keeping low, Lucanus jumped to his feet and followed the tray. He needed to swipe the keys before the waiter reached the kitchen, which, judging from the speed of his steps, the man was keen to do. "Couldn't have just held on to them, could you, cousin?" Lucanus thought as he scurried across the slick roof tiles. The balls of his feet arched inward, searching for traction. Keep moving, he told himself. Right now, momentum was his only friend. The waiter continued to hasten through the crowd. Lucanus' stomach tensed as a disembodied hand stretched from the thong to snatch throng, not thong, to snatch the remaining glasses. Luckily, no one seemed to notice the tray's stowaway. Up ahead, Lucanus spied the servants' entrance. If he could reach it, there was just enough space to wedge his body into the covered niche above the door. Not easily, of course, but nothing ever was. This is okay. Now that we know Lucanus is a short king, I kind of wonder if maybe this is to his advantage, that he is able to kind of wedge his body into tiny places. He increased his speed to a run, trusting the music and general noise from the pantry to his footfalls. His eyes started left and right. No one had spotted him yet, but if he missed this jump, he'd have everyone's attention. Don't think about it. Lucanus took a deep breath and flung himself off the roof. Suspended in air, time seemed to slow. The only sound that registered was a gust of wind rushing past his face. The opposite wall moved towards Lucanus with the weight of a warship on the horizon. Then his gloved fingers caught the ledge and he felt everything at once. A burning pressure shot through the marrow of his bones, and the surrounding muscles screamed as he twisted his torso to keep from slamming into the wall. Casting his momentum backwards and forward again, he swung up into a plank position across the columns framing the servants' entrance. 2 minutes later, the waiter passed below, holding the tray and key ring aloft, ripe for the plucking. Lucanus relieved the man of his burden, then climbed back up to the roof and dashed towards the door Ambrose had disappeared through. Now, the hard part. Lucanus greeted the guard on the other side of the door with a dagger to the throat. He covered his mouth to muffle the gurgling noise, then dragged the body behind one of the curtains covering the windows. Lucanus thought about securing the entrance. Leaving it unlocked could raise suspicion, but chose not to in case Ilario decided to work tonight. He could already hear his cousin's honeyed excuses, but seducing a beautiful woman is work. He snorted and pushed farther inside. The cold opulence of the palace, reminded Lucanus of a chantry rather than a home. Atlases bearing the visages of past archons held up vaulted ceilings glittering with a mosaic depictions of Tevinter's golden age. The cost of such a commission must have been astronomical, both in coin and in lives. How many slaves have gone blind gilding each individual tile? How many backs had been broken from hauling and placing stone after stone? There was patriotism and there was obsession. Neither was worth it. I love this stance by Lucanus. Fuck these Tevinter elites. The only part of the mansion's interior design Lucanus did appreciate was the abundance of pointed lines and edges, which made scaling walls a cinch. Hopping from one stone archon to the next, he moved down the curved hall. He hadn't seen where Ambrose had gone, but he had a fast rule when hunting Venatori. Follow the headache. Sure enough, at the end of the hall, he spotted 8 guards, Ambrose's retinue. One duo watched the adjoining corridor, while another patrolled the center. 2 were posted at the windows, and the lair past flanked an imposing studded door. Lucanus gritted his teeth as the scraping inside his skull intensified. Is he not concerned about that? He's just like, okay, I guess everybody experiences this. Every instinct in his body told him that Ambrose was behind that door. But first, he had to deal with the guards. The 2 on patrol passed underneath. Both men were solidly built, with scars peeping from their uniform collars. Each carried a sword and a dagger. Reaching into his jacket pocket, Lucanus retrieved a long spool of wire attached to 2 wooden scrips. He backtracked across the archon heads and waited for the guards to round the corner. Measuring out a decent length of wire, Lucanus spun the garrote, then whipped it down around the first guard's neck. 1 for silence. The man lurched into the air as Lucanus used his weight as leverage to glide down onto the second guard's shoulders. 2 for surprise. Tucking his ankle underneath his left knee, Lucanus held one man in a stranglehold while the other dangled overhead, his feet kicking wildly. The second guard's fists beat against Lucanus's shins. He elbowed him in response, jerking the suspended guard up and down until his legs went ragdoll slack. The second guard continued to fight, but his strength was fading. Lucanus tightened his grip and twisted until he heard the guard's neck crack. "Pallas, everything all right?" Wrapping the end of the garrote around the second guard's broken neck, Lucanus somersaulted backward. The dead weight of the first man pulled the second one up until they both hung around the limestone Archon's nape like loose cravat. "Better check it out," another guard said. Their exchange was followed by the sound of tentative footsteps. "These guys are like NPCs in like a Batman game. Not only do they not look out, they look up. They talk like one." Lucanus sunk back into the shadows and ascended the column once more. Across his chest, a leather strap held 4 throwing knives. He grabbed 2 in anticipation. The steps grew louder. 8 feet, 4 guards. That left 2 at the door. "Pallas, we told you, no pranks tonight." "Not with the crows circling." Even without the uniforms, the guards could have been related. They all possessed the same hard brow and flat, broken nose that hadn't been set correctly. Maybe they went for a piss? They know better than to leave their post. "Spread out." Lucanus mouthed the words as the guard gave the order. They created a wedge formation with 1 in the lead and 3 taking up the rear. Aiming carefully, Lucanus let loose 1 of the throwing knives. 3 for good measure. It sliced through the target's spine with clean precision. The guard slumped to his partner's shoulder. He turned. "What the?" A squishy thud interrupted him. He glanced down to find a knife in his heart and joined the other guard on the floor. 4's exercise. The formation broke. "He's here! The crow's here!" Another pair of Ambrose's retinue rushed around the corner. Flicking his wrists, Lucanus produced a stiletto dagger from each sleeve and dropped down to the reinforcements. The violence of the fall drove the pointed blades into their skulls with ease. 5 for a slaughter, 6 for the thrill. The remaining 8 guards stood to back, staring at him as if he were death itself. Lucanus unsheathed his sword. After a few shaky breaths, they yelled and charged toward him. He parried the first guard's blow, then slid behind the second, which severed his hamstring. 7 means more sovereigns. Twirling back into a standing position, he decapitated the kneeling man with 1 powerful swing. "Shit," the last guard stammered, his boots inching backward. "Shit," he ran. Lucanus went for his throwing knives when a steel blade whirled past his head to land in the guard's back, dropping him like a stone. 8 marks the final kill, Ilario said, coming to stand next to him. He dusted off his palms. "Do you still recite that old nursery rhyme? The one Katerina made us memorize during training?" Quite the damn nursery rhyme. Like, like this story drops all these hints of how traumatizing Ilario and Lucanus's upbringing is, and they're so like normal about it that they talk about it with like it's nothing. But reading it, you're like, guys, that was bad. They did a bad thing to you. Lucanus moved to retrieve his throwing knives. "What can I say? It's catchy." "That's a word for it." Ilario glanced at the swaying guards overhead. "You know, if the Vints ever learn to look up, you're screwed. They'd have to stop looking down their noses." He narrowed down his eyes. "Your tunic's rumpled." Ilario flashed a sheepish grin. "You weren't the only one tussling with guards." "Tussling, huh?" Lucanus shook his head. "That's a word for it." "I'm happy to kiss and tell, but shouldn't we do something about this?" Ilario wrinkled his nose and nodded towards the sticky fluid seeping from underneath the slain guards. Lucanus wiped his blade clean and advanced towards the studded door. "Leave it." "What? Out in the open? You bring him up?" Ilario glowered at him. No, but you've half an armory stored in that coat. I thought maybe unlimited knives. He unlocked the unlimited knives cheat. Both men froze. At the end of the hall, an elven woman gaped. She was a collection of bones covered in dry, flaky skin and a shaved head. The chains around her wrists and ankles marked her as one of the Wigmaker's slaves. The linens she had been carrying tumbled to the ground in a heap. Ilario cursed. Bad timing, Miyakara. The woman trembled. She was so thin, the grooves in her joints were clearly visible. Please, she begged. Lucanus arched a brow. Her voice was young. He approached with leisurely steps. Please, she repeated, her tone growing panicked. I won't. Shh, Lucanus murmured. How old are you? She blinked, thinking for a moment, then admitted, I don't know. What about your name? Effie. The pores on Effie's scalp were an angry red, as if her hair had been torn from the root. Did he do that? Lucanus asked, pointing. She instinctively reached up to touch her irritated skin. I had split ends. Master doesn't like split ends. Oh my god. Lucanus made a fist to quell the rage growing within him. He leaned over to pick up the fallen linens. Go back the way you came. She's seen our faces, Ilario hissed. Lucanus stared into Effie's wide, wondering eyes. Despite her fear, she didn't look away. No, she hasn't. He handed her the linens. Have you? She shook her head. Lucanus nodded for her to leave. Effie took a couple steps backward, then bit her lip. You're the crow, aren't you? The one sent to kill my master? I am, Lucanus replied, his tone matter-of-fact. Ilario swore under his breath. Tell her everything, why don't you? Have you done it yet? Effie asked, growing tense. No. Will you? Yes. She closed her eyes and clasped the linens in her chest. Good. You want him dead? Ilario asked, puzzled. Why? Your next master could be worse. Effie pointed towards the studded door, her expression cold. You'll see. Why wouldn't she want him dead, Ilario? Fuck. Lucanus flipped through the keys until he found one large enough to match the door's iron lock. Never known you to have a soft heart, Ilario muttered. Lucanus's right cheek muscle twitched. She won't talk. This isn't Antiva. We're not heroes here. We're not heroes anywhere, cousin. Ilario rolled his eyes. You know what I mean. The Venatori already have your name. If they learn your face, I'll grow a beard, Lucanus smirked. And apparently he does. They'll never see me coming. Ilario's frustration deflated. He grinned reluctantly. That cavalier attitude's going to get you killed. Lucanus turned the key until the bolt unlatched. It served me well enough so far. Securing the grip on his sword, he eased the door open and peeked inside. There was nothing but darkness and stale air. Lucanus gestured for Ilario to follow as he slipped through the entryway. They stood for a moment, quiet and still, allowing their eyes to adjust. 10 paces ahead, a stairwell materialized in the shadows. The descent was slow-going. Wrought iron made for easy creaks and groans. Each step was a test of patience and balance. Lucanus went first, showing Ilario where to place his feet. Despite their descent underground, the temperature was rising. At the bottom, an arched entryway emitted a red glow that bled into knobby cobblestones. The light should have been refreshing in the dark, but Lucanus had visited enough bad places to know he wasn't going to like this room. And he didn't. So that content warning I gave at the beginning of this commentary, just heads up, this is the first of 2 primary scenes that are very disturbing. Row after row, men and women were chained to the ceiling in a tidy formation, their heads lolled forward between straining shoulders. Cascades of hair tumbled past amputated knees to settle in pools of silver, black, gold, and copper, a shiny, terrible rainbow of hair. Lucanus approached the first row. Up close, he noticed their skin had turned an ash gray and was spotted with crystallized sores. Gently, he pushed the hair from one of their faces. The man's mouth was sewn shut, his eyes milky. He twisted towards Lucanus. All at once, the room became aware of strangers were present. One by one, they moaned a horrifying chorus of despair. Like, this is just really disturbing for me, at least. The imagery. Lucanus stumbled back, his mouth dry. Something inside him snapped. Death's too good for this bastard. Ilario touched his arm. Only then did Lucanus realize how quickly he was breathing. He closed his eyes. Remember your training, he told himself, and suddenly he could hear the tapping of his grandmother's cane, the hard elegance of her voice. There is no place for emotion in killing. It's sloppy. File it down. Make it useful. Make it useful, he repeated to himself. With slow, controlled breaths, Lucanus flushed the rage pumping through his veins until he could think clearly. Ambrose would die, that was certain, but he couldn't walk away from these people. I would say that Lucanus has some anger issues, but honestly, everything he's been angry about is entirely justified. So, like, I would feel the same, man. He returned to the man's side and reached for the irons around his wrists. What are you doing? Ilario whispered. Breaking their shackles. Ilario stared. That's not the job. Fuck the job. From the back of the chamber, a humming joined the melodious wails. Lucanus peered into the gloom, but the source was too far to see. He locked eyes with Ilario and jerked his thumbs towards the sound. Weaving among the pendulous bodies, they crept closer. The moans grew louder. Lucanus did his best to avoid brushing against the clammy limbs, but the prisoners were packed in tight. Finally, through the forest of undulating torsos, he could discern a figure hunched over in the dark. You're lively tonight, my lovelies, Ambrose said, taking a pair of shears in hand. On his desk, a collection of gleaming combs, hackles, and needles were meticulously organized in glass containers. Do you wish to join the party? Rising on his tiptoes, he unchained one of the prisoners to sit him down in a chair next to the workstation. All in good time, the Wigmaker promised. The prisoner stared ahead. His elongated arms and limbs had atrophied. Both the shoulders jutted forward at a cruel angle, stretching the bruised skin. Lucanus knew from experience that they were dislocated. You knew from experience, eh? Does that mean he's done it or it's happened to him? Probably both. After donning a set of leather gloves, the Wigmaker opened one of the desk's drawers. The chamber's soft glow became a brilliant vermilion. Lucanus craned his neck to see Ambrose retrieve pebble-sized chunks of red lyrium. Shit. Ambrose resumed his mellow tune. Using a basalt mortar and pestle, he ground delirium into a powder. Once he was satisfied with the consistency, he poured the contents into a goblet of wine. Pivoting back towards the prisoner, Ambrose snipped the knot at the corner of his mouth and unlaced the thread binding his lips. His jaw fell open with a raspy wheeze. Drink up, my dear, the Wigmaker whispered, tipping the prisoner's head back. A grin spread across his face as he watched the man's throat work down the liquid. Just absolutely disgusting. This man is... Courtney Woods did a really good job at creating this evil, evil bastard. Lucanus thought he'd forgotten what fear felt like, but its cold embrace was easily recognizable. He remembered the models with their dead eyes, how the wig seemed to be alive with magic. Red lyrium would explain why the veil was so thin, and yet... He glanced around at the bodies filled with anguish and suffering. This place should be a hotbed for demons. How was Ambrose keeping them at bay? Think, damn it, Lucanus racked his brain. There were rumors of elven artifacts that strengthened the veil and prevented demons from breaking through. Perhaps Ambrose had acquired one? He surveyed the room, searching for something, anything that might provide a barrier against the spirit world. But there was nothing except for hair, bodies, and the Wigmaker's workstation. Then Ilario's words came to mind. If the Vince ever learn to look up, you're screwed. His gaze lifted. In the center of the chamber, a small cage hung from the ceiling. Inside was a globe crackling with green energy. Warm satisfaction spread through him. Gotcha. So I gotta admit that before this story, I thought that Solus's elven artifacts were full of shit, but apparently they were legit. Apparently we were actually strengthening the veil in Inquisition, running around turning on all those things. Bossuary, yeah, that's a good point too. Like, I doubt the Antivan Crows would just randomly know about these elven artifacts, so how does Lucanus know about them? They seem to be obscure lore, I don't know. Meanwhile, Ambrose had redressed the prisoner's mouth and was fastening his shackles. I'm afraid the rest of you will have to wait. I don't care what Camille says, I'm not missing the show's finale. He brought a lock of hair to his nose and inhaled deeply. I've worked too hard. To his right, Lucanus sensed Ilario readying his dagger. He gently grabbed his cousin's wrist and shook his head. Ilario gawked at him, his jaw clenched. The Wigmaker began the walk back towards the stairs. A groaning lament followed as he passed. When he was close enough to touch, Ilario tensed, as if to lunge forward. Lucanus tightened his hold, his thumb finding the pressure point at the base of his wrist. The dagger fell from Ilario's grasp. Lucanus swiped it up before it clanged to the ground. What are you doing? Ilario mouthed. Again, Lucanus motioned him to stand down. Once they heard Ambrosius climb the stairs and close the door, Ilario wrenched his arm free. Have you lost your mind? We had him. He doesn't deserve a quick death. Did you forget the mess you left upstairs? What do you think will happen when Ambrose finds his bodyguard slaughtered? Hopefully he panics. I want him scared. He'll flee, Ilario asserted, and his contract will be forfeit. Your life will be forfeit. Ambrose would never leave his creations. Lucanus appraised the brutality that surrounded him. Don't worry, cousin. He'll die, but in the right way. Ilario threw his hands up. Death is death. There's still time to chase Ambrose down, but we need to leave, now. Magic isn't my forte, but even I know red lyrium is bad news. It infects people's minds. Lucanus, Ilario pressed. We can't help these people. Lucanus looked at the caged globe. No, but we can give them vengeance. Okay, buddy, getting sidetracked by a lot here, but I love it. After placing Ilario's dagger between his teeth, Lucanus jumped to seize the bottom rungs of the cage. The chain swiveled from the added weight to the held strong. He pulled himself up. There was just enough space between the bars to reach inside. What are you doing? Ilario called out. Lucanus took the dagger from his mouth and positioned it over the artifact. You'll see. Ilario groaned. I really wish people would stop saying that. Breathing deep, Lucanus plunged the dagger into the globe. The strength of the stone ricocheted up through the joints of his arm. He watched the green light sputter and fizzle. There was a moment of silence, then madness. Seriously, what did you do? Ilario yelled as they raced up the stairs, a cacophony of twisting bones and snapping shackles at their heels. That globe was keeping the veil intact, Lucanus explained, taking 2 steps at a time. So you stabbed it? You said yourself, vengeance was the best I could offer. No, Ilario retorted, his breath heavy from exertion. My exact words were, we can't help these people. I said nothing of vengeance. You're the vengeancey one. So Ilario didn't know about the globe thing. I guess that kind of insinuates that it was something Lucanus picked up, you know, on his hunt for Venatori. They neared the top of the stairs. Lucanus used the railing to propel himself forward. Trust me, to Ambrose, turning his creations against him is a fate worse than death. I'm sorry, did the contract ask for a fate worse than death? Usually, it's just death. Ilario, but the other crow, wasn't finished. I thought the plan was to have a few laughs, slit some throats, not release a demon swarm. Plans change, Lucanus replied. His gloved palm covered the door handle. Well, for the record, I preferred the other one. Noted. He went to yank the door open, then hesitated. Do you hear that? Ilario's legs bounced impatiently. The demons? Yes, I hear them. Lucanus shook his head. There's no alarm. Ambrose should have found the bodies by now. Ilario tilted his head, then shrugged. Don't question the Maker's miracles, cousin. Lucanus moved his ear closer to the door's studded surface. Swirling water, soap suds bubbled and popped. A loud slap echoed as the drenched fabric hit marble. A mop? He opened the door. The hall was empty. Lucanus tossed Ilario his dagger, then readied his own. Cautiously, they ventured forth. With the tense muscles, they rounded the corner. The guards' corpses were gone. In their place, they found Effie cleaning the floor. When she saw Lucanus, her knuckles turned white. You said you'd kill him. Lucanus motioned Ilario to lower his weapon. It's all right. It's not, her voice quivered. Master just passed this way. If he finds out I helped you, he'll... He won't, Lucanus promised. Where are the bodies? Ilario asked. Effie shrank into herself. I moved them. Daredevil sensory. That's interesting. He's got maybe it's just out of practice. For the effect. Not by yourself, you didn't. He turned to Lucanus, a smug sneer on his face. I told you she'd talk. Only to the other slaves. Please, she pleaded to Lucanus. I didn't tell them what you'd look like, only that you're here. They wanted to help. She squared her slight shoulders. You promised to kill him. And you promised to keep your mouth shut, Ilario chided. Back down the hall, something wet slammed against the studded door. Effie's bravado crumbled. What was that? Take her, Lucanus told Ilario. Find the others. Other what? His eyes darted to the elf. Slaves? Absolutely not. Behind them, a second fleshy thud echoed, then a third, and a fourth. Lucanus continued as if Ilario had agreed. There's a statue with a passage, like the one we used before. It's not far. You should be able to escape in the chaos. Ilario blenched. Did you not hear me? I said, Athema will help you. She's the elf we met earlier. I don't give a damn what her name is. I'm not. Once Ambrose is dealt with, I'll meet you at the docks. Lucanus! Ilario shouted. We are not revolutionaries! This is funny given we know the crows are fighting the Kunari occupation in Dragon Age the Veilguard. Lucanus inhaled, his nostrils flaring. Ilario was right. The Antivan crows were assassins, not freedom fighters. Back home, people liked to romanticize, but Lucanus knew what he was. Still, his fingers twitched. They are not responsible for their master's mistakes. He locked eyes with his cousin. Ilario tried to remain resolute, but it was like touching hot steel. Sighing, he cursed and turned to Effie. Come on, Ilario snapped. She glanced towards Lucanus. He gave her a reassuring nod. My cousin may be a snob, but he's true to his word. Are you? She asked, referring to his promise about Ambrose. The Wigmaker will die tonight, Lucanus affirmed, but you have to go. It's about to become very dangerous. As if to prove his point, someone outside screamed. The scene in the courtyard had changed dramatically, but if Lucanus was being honest, he preferred chaos to debauchery. It gave him satisfaction to watch drunken Vince trip over themselves, desperate to find an exit. Wine and blue blood spilled in equal measure as guests careened through the obstacle course of upturned chase lounges and broken glass. The demons had possessed the models first, the red lyrium-imbued wigs, an enticing lure. Their bony bodies stretched into towering masses of contorted flesh. The transformation affected the wigs, too, giving them locks of serrated edge. Strands stuck out at odd angles, whipping wildly, cutting anyone who drew too close. For mages, fear was an open invitation to demonic possession, and the alcohol the guests had consumed had dulled their defenses. One after another, the drunkest and most frightened among them fell prey to malicious spirits watching, waiting on the other side of the veil. Lucanus felt no sympathy. They were, after all of them Venatori supporters, who either knew what Ambrose was doing or chose to turn a blind eye to indulge their own vanity. Ignorance is bliss, not innocence. He spotted Ambrose Forfax at the center of the carnage, surrounded by a gleaming pile of hair. The wigmaker was shouting at Camille to cut his wigs off the abominations. Her painted arms were getting sliced to ribbons for her efforts. Growing impatient, Ambrose snarled, "Get out of the way!" He shoved the guard captain. Her ankle, unaccustomed to heels, twisted and snapped. Camille fell forward towards one of the abominations. An errant lock of hair caught her throat. The gash was thin but deep. With frantic fingers, she tried to apply pressure. She looked to Ambrose and extended a pleading hand. The mage rolled his eyes. Useless. What? Oh my, he's like a Disney villain at this point, and I kind of like it. Because I feel like it's intentional. At least that's the vibe I get, personally. Ambrose grabbed her wrist and pulled the pressure off her neck, allowing the blood to flow freely. This, however, the guard captain collapsed at his feet. Employing Camille's blood as a catalyst, the wigmaker impaled the abomination with spikes of crimson energy. The monstrous corpse exploded with a hit to the ground, but Ambrose had enough foresight to create a barrier, shielding himself from the gore. The wigmaker leaned over to lift a stringy tangle of hair from the grisly pile. Lucanus dropped onto the runway. His sword arm limber with anticipation, he stalked towards Ambrose. "Nothing a little soap can't fix," he offered. Ambrose threw down the matted mess. "Lucanus Della Morte, I presume?" "Si," Lucanus answered, knowing even a single syllable of a foreign language would disgust the wigmaker. It had the desired effect. Ambrose recoiled as if he'd stepped in urine. "Is this your handiwork?" "Si." The mage's jaw pulsed. "You think you can come into my Imperium and act as judge and executioner?" Lucanus opened his mouth to respond, but Ambrose anticipated his answer. "Don't say si." That earned a genuine smile from Lucanus. "Normally, there's no judgment, only a contract. But for you, Ambrose, I made an exception." The wigmaker raised a brow. "Oh, what makes me so special?" "You upset my delicate sensibilities." It was Ambrose's turn to laugh. "I thought a crow could stomach anything for the right price." I wonder what would have happened if it had been anybody but Lucanus for this job, because Ambrose has a point. Lucanus leveled the wigmaker with a pointed look. "Not red lyrium. Morality is not static. Right and wrong are a matter of perspective." Ambrose's words were practiced and tired, as if he had given the same reasoning 100 times. Lucanus continued his advance, refusing to engage in the wigmaker's rhetoric. Nothing irritated him more than self-righteous excuses. If you're going to do something terrible, just own it. The abominations from the workshop had joined the party. One of them seized a fleeing guard. He screamed as it wrapped him in a cocoon of razor-sharp hair. Blood oozed from the coiled strands. Ambrose shot a quick glance at Camille's corpse. The gesture lasted only a split second, but it was enough to prompt Lucanus to increase his pace. "Close the distance, and don't let him get a spell off." Chanting under his breath, the Wigmaker began summoning a bloody mist from the guard captain's remains. The lifeless skin paled and shriveled. Lucanus broke into a run. The mist sharpened into 1,000 tiny needles. Ambrose raised his arm. Not gonna make it, Lucanus thought, snatching a knife from his coat. The needles vibrated eagerly. Just as the Wigmaker launched them forward, Lucanus threw his knife, taking off 4 of Ambrose's fingers. Without a mage to guide them, the needles transformed back into globules of blood and rained down on the catwalk. An interesting effect, though. Blood magic is so fucking cool. I don't care what anybody says. I know it's potentially used for evil, just as anything can potentially be used for evil in this world. Like, you can use a sword for evil. But it's got so much cool style flavor. Ambrose, clutching his ruined hand, crumbled to his knees. You should be more careful, Lucanus said. Fingers are a Wigmaker's tools, are they not? This next piece, coming up soon, is the second really grotesque part, by the way. We're getting to it in a minute. Hopelessness flooded the mage's eyes. One day, someone would turn your work against you. Only then will you have some semblance of the emptiness you've made me feel. With his good hand, he gathered what was left of the wigs, hugging the locks to his chest. Lucanus experienced a twinge of disappointment, kindling for rage. He expected more fight from a high-ranking Venatori. He thought of the Wigmaker's workshop, of the prisoners, their bellies full of poison, hanging like butchered pigs in a stale, suffocating darkness. Get up, Ambrose, he growled. You don't get to do that. You don't get to quit. The word quit sparkled something in the Wigmaker's blank expression. So, the crow thinks he can best the dragon? The crow, Lucanus mocked, knows it. A cackle, distorted and unhinged, erupted from Ambrose's lips. The hair in his fist glowed, and Lucanus swore he heard the strands whisper. I'll make you eat those words, Ambrose promised, his voice no longer his own. Lucanus watched, repulsed, as the Wigmaker began shoving locks of hair into his mouth. The sharp edges shredded his tongue and gums, but he continued stuffing, chewing, and eating until the bottom half of his face was ground meat. That's one way to make a point, Lucanus thought, coming to a stop. Gnarled cords of muscle ripped at the seams of the Wigmaker's clothing. Cartilage tore. Vertebrae popped. Ambrose held his pulsing, distended scalp. Strands of hair cut through the skin, lashing out like a sea monster. Lucanus had seen many abominations, but never one like this. It was almost arachnid in shape, with 8 segments of spiky hair forming the legs, and Ambrose's twisted, mutated body making up the abdomen. It sounds a little bit like a fear demon, but like a hairy fear demon? I don't know. Something special. I don't know what kind of demon this is that's turning Ambrose into an abomination. Hunger could be a possibility, Neopho. I don't know. It's something else. Thought you said dragon, not spider, Lucanus taunted, hoping to distract the beast while he searched for a route to higher ground. In response, the creature rose to its full height, then slashed at the crow with its serrated limbs. Lucanus dove sideways, mere seconds before the monster's front legs pierced the runway. This is why you don't talk during a fight, Lucanus scolded himself. Zigzagging and zagging to avoid the spiked appendages, he sped towards the arched columns. He ducked under another abomination's swinging claws and inhaled a chestful of air before scrambling up the first column, then the second. His fingers had just grazed the final ledge when a searing pain shot through his right shoulder. Lucanus tried to pull away, but he could feel the hair wrap around his clavicle, yanking him back from the inside. He lost his grip. The abomination hurled Lucanus skyward. More legs perforated his hip, bicep, and thigh. Steeling himself against the pain, Lucanus flipped backward and severed the hairy limbs. He heard an inhuman shriek, and then he was falling. Lucanus hit the roof with a smack powerful enough to fracture the clay tiles and 2 of his ribs. Make that 3, he noted, rolling onto his back. Below, the abomination let out a high-pitched wail. Lucanus gritted his teeth and forced himself to peer over the inside. With 4 of its legs now too short to support its body, the creature struggled to stand. Sensing its weakness and spurred on by the demons of vengeance within, the other abominations began to surround it. "That's it," Lucanus smiled encouragingly. "Good little demons." Turning his sword over in his palm, he cut across the roof. The smaller abominations pushed the larger beast into a corner. The creature reared back to swipe at the encroaching swarm, exposing Ambrose's distorted frame. One of the slashed legs constricted around an attacking abomination. Ambrose's mouth opened wide, unhooking its maimed jaw to swallow the abomination whole. Have we ever seen abominations fight each other like this? I'm trying to recall. I think this might be the first instance of abominations fighting each other. The legs began to grow back before Lucanus's eyes. "No, you don't," he shouted. Raising his sword overhead, Lucanus leapt off the roof. He could hear the clamoring horde below, but he kept his focus on the creature's underbelly. Too late, it tried to protect itself. Hundreds of wiry strands whipped through the air, catching only the wind. Lucanus plunged his sword into Ambrose's mangled sternum. He dragged the blade down in one long, clean cut until he ran out of flesh. For a moment, the abomination wobbled. The fissure in its core festered with inky spume. Then, slowly, the viscous halves split, folding outward. A putrid vapor infected the atmosphere. The locks of hair composing the creature's legs disjointed and fizzled with static. Panting heavily, Lucanus regarded the creature's collapse without joy or anger. The vermilion fire engulfed the carcass, leaving nothing but a brittle husk. The other abominations stirred. "You have your vengeance," Lucanus rasped. But his words did not reach him. They stared, snarling and ready. He squeezed the grip of his sword, preparing for another fight. Then the pressure behind his skull eased. Without the Wigmaker, the demons had no anchor in the waking world. Gradually, the abominations disintegrated into ash. With the source of their anger gone, the spirits of vengeance returned to the Fade, allowing the dead to rest. Only then did Lucanus exhale and let a relief wash over him. Contract complete. Lucanus reached the docks just before dawn. Knowing Ilario, as he did, he passed their ship's allotted berth to check the nearby taverns. After a quick glance up and down the harbor, Lucanus settled on the Nug Queen purely because it was the cleanest establishment of the lot. Also, it has a cool name. The Nug Queen. When he entered, limping and bloody, the barkeep glowered. "Walk out the way you came," the dwarf instructed. He had a tawny mustache that twirled and waxed at both ends. "I'm looking for my cousin," Lucanus explained. "Don't care," the dwarf replied. "I know trouble when I see it, even if it's not bleeding on my floorboards." Lucanus scanned the room for Ilario. The barkeep's attitude aside, the tavern was inviting with its pristine white walls and peacock blue cushions. A brass nug, wearing a little crown, reigned over the bar's sparse patrons. Most had turned in for the night, but a few sleepy, sullen customers remained, staring into their pints for answers or comfort. Not seeing his cousin among them, Lucanus prepared to leave. Then he heard Ilario's silvery voice flattering one of the waiters. "Oi!" the dwarf called as Lucanus staggered towards the row of booths lining the left side of the tavern. "Exits that way!" His bellowing drew Ilario's attention away from the handsome servant. Upon seeing Lucanus, he jumped to his feet. "Andraste's holy cabbage, you look like shit." "Get that man to stop yelling at me," Lucanus said. He plopped down in the booth, taking a moment to rest his eyes, while Ilario soothed the irate proprietor. Eat a protein bar. That will fix him. "Drink," his cousin offered, returning with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. "It's expensive." Lucanus accepted with a faint nod. "Some say a bribe spoils the vintage," Ilario mused while pouring, "but I think it tastes all the sweeter." Effie and the others, did you get them to— Yes, yes, Ilario snapped. I did my good deed for the year. The two paused to sip their wine. Lucanus rolled the liquid over his tongue. Bravery had not spoiled this bottle, at least. Camille didn't make it, he said finally. Who? The guard captain. Ah, Ilario said, nodding in recognition. Well, that does free me from promises I didn't intend to keep. And Ambrose? You have to ask? Fair enough. That his? He gestured towards the dark stains on Lucanus's coat. Mostly. His cousin's brows drew together. Do you need a healer? The ship will have one, but if you can't wait— I'm fine, Lucanus stated. All right, Ilario said, topping off his glass. We'll just pretend that's wine you're dripping all over the table. What do you want me to say? Ilario's gaze grew hard. How long are you going to keep doing this? Doing what? Katerina's bidding. I love this conversation so much. The wine turned in Lucanus's mouth. Ilario, stop. If I was in charge, you wouldn't have to do this anymore, he cajoled. You could quit. Lucanus stared back at his cousin. I don't want to quit. Ilario sat back. The distance between them suddenly felt much wider than a table. Even if it kills you, Ilario whispered. Death is my calling, Lucanus stated, matter of fact. Just as yours is to become First Talon. He smiled, hoping to ease the tension, but Ilario's posture remained taut. And if Katerina disagrees? If she thinks you're better man for the job? I don't want it, Ilario, Lucanus insisted. But you wouldn't refuse. It's impossible to refuse Katerina, Lucanus admitted reluctantly. Only prolong her until she sees reason. He knew it wasn't the answer Ilario wanted, but it was the truth. And in their line of work, honesty was hard to come by. Ilario exhaled and lifted his wine glass to salute. To reason, then. To reason, Lucanus echoed. The two crows clinked their rims of their glasses together, then prepared for the long journey home. I don't know if there will be a quest for who should become First Talon. I don't know if it's going to be an optional ending for Lucanus and or Ilario, whatever the case may be, or somebody else, who knows. But I do know, if there is, I would be first in line to do it. Forget the main plot. Give me all that crow quests. Magister Zara Renata stood nude before a gilded full-length mirror. Every morning she assessed her body, starting with the toes, then working her way up to her face. 3 slaves, each bearing a smaller looking-glass, stood on either side at her back so that there was no blind spots. They stared, unblinking, at her lustrous bronze skin. Looking at anything other than their mistress risked a punishment most severe. There was a knock at the door. Normally, Zara would not tolerate an interruption during her morning regimen, but she had been looking forward to this particular visit. Enter, she instructed, glancing over her shoulder to admire the curve of her lower back. Crispin Cavlo and Felicia Aramont, mistress, a perfumed beauty announced. No one in Zara's household looked a day over 35. The 2 guests undoubtedly noticed their host's nakedness, but kept their expressions neutral. I take it Ambrose didn't listen, Zara began without ceremony. We advised him to cancel the show, Crispin replied. He refused, Felicia added. Artists, Zara bemoaned, always prioritizing their work over what really matters. I like how she says this while she herself is obsessing over her beauty. Turning in the light, she noticed a faint stretch mark on her hip. Zara snapped at one of the slaves to extend her arm. She did so without hesitation. Reaching back, Zara removed a pointed hairpin from the bountiful bun at her neck. She handed it to the slave, who dutifully pierced her palm with a sharp tip. Squeezing her hand shut, the slave dripped blood onto her mistress's hip. Zara murmured a quick spell. When the slave wiped her skin clean, the offending blemish was gone. How many dead? She asked. The body count is ongoing. A simple estimate, please. Around 40, including Ambrose. Zara's brows rose. My. All the work of one crow. We believe he had assistance, but yes, Felicia nodded gravely. Lucanus Delamorte is responsible. Crispin licked his lips. We won't be able to keep this one from the public. He and Felicia exchanged a nervous glance. They're already calling him the Demon, which is quite funny. From flying vermin to malicious spirit, that's quite a promotion. With a ribbon, Zara measured the width of her waist. The corner of her mouth ticked upward at the result. We have reason to believe you could be his next target, Felicia said. Your place in the magisterium puts you at risk, Crispin elaborated, his tone rushed. Worried for me, Crispin? Zara asked. The younger man reddened, but she noticed he didn't deny it. Don't be. I'm not a fool like Ambrose. A true Maleficar knows demons cannot be killed, only controlled. If this crow fancies himself a demon, then I look forward to using him to his full potential. Oh my god. Oh my god, the foreshadowing here has to be off the charts. It's just too poignant. It's too intense. The way they're speaking, oh my god. How? Crispin asked. Never underestimate the power of observation, Zara lectured. I'll keep a low profile. That should entice him to move on to more exciting prey. But he'll continue killing Venatori, Felicia pointed out, for which he will be duly punished. In the meantime, we practice patience. Zara paused to marvel at herself. Every feature and proportion were in perfect symmetry, and yet, when she smiled, there was something ugly behind it. Freeing Ambrose's slaves already tells us this crow has a heart. He will reveal other flaws, and we will exploit every last one of them. And that is the end of the Wigmaker job. Thank you, everybody who has attended. It's one of my favorite ones, certainly. I just want to, before we sign off, direct everybody's attention once more to the link you're seeing on the screen. It is a GoFundMe for Cassandra the lesbian sister, who is currently in Gaza, and her family. They could really use all the help they can get, so even if you can only donate a little bit, it really does count towards something important, like, you know, the well-being and lives of a lot of people. So I just want to stress the importance of that, because I want to make use of these readings to raise awareness of this fundraiser. So thank you for everybody who's joined, and a special thank you to those who have donated.